Welcome back. Today let's take a look at the OpenToonz project, how to navigate it, how to find things, and let's just take a look at the code base. Alright, so here we are in the terminal, and we're going to list, using ls, the ls command, to list the contents of that directory. Now there's a whole bunch of things in here: scripts, contributions, your license, documentation. If we look at the documentation, gives a whole slew of information. I'll come back to those. Last time we built everything, so we kind of understand how to do that. So now let's actually take a look at three folders. Stuff, third party, and Toonz. So if I list what's in stuff, this contains the configuration files, more documentation, libraries, plugins, etc. So let's go actually into stuff, and let's look at the doc. So there's a bunch of PDFs in here inside the doc folder that will basically kind of give us information on plugins, how to do certain things within the application once we build it. These things will be important. So there'll be something that we'll come back to, and we'll kind of go through each one of these individually at greater detail. So that's what's in stuff. I'll clean things up. Now let's take a look at third party. So inside a third party, these are all the third-party tools that we install during, our installation. So libmypaint, if we go into libmypaint, here's the scripts. The distribution is for dist. So let's go into dist. This is 32-bit and 64-bit. So if I go into 64, here's the compiled DLLs. So here's all of the libpaint tools, and here's my libpaint.lib for Unix, and then here's the libpaint 140 DLL for Windows, and the same thing with these two. There are three. If I go into the include, one more, into libpaint, these are going to be all the header files. Now these header files, they communicate with this lib. And I could do another video if you like on how the header files communicate with the library file. But for right now, let's just take a look at one file, which is the libmypaint brush. So if I do cat, the libpaint my brush, it's going to list all of the descriptions for this C++ file, along with the copyright, etc. Now each one of these descriptions, these are definitions. So we can do all of this stuff inside of the I'll go by one more. We can do all of this inside of we can do all of this inside the shell. Searching and looking for things. Sometimes that's pretty helpful. Now let's take a look at Toonz. We'll go into Toonz. And then here's all the folders inside of Toonz. We have our CMake folder, our build folder, our install, and then our sources. Now the sources folder, this is what's going to contain all our code. This build folder is going to contain all of the binaries that we built using CMake. Now once we generate all of the CMake files, and the project settings inside the build folder will then actually compile, and we'll have the finished binaries inside the build. So here I am in QCreator, and here's the project. Now I can view this in several ways. Right now I'm viewing this as the project in its project settings form. So here's my CMake lists. And I could do a video on CMake. Just leave a comment if you'd like some CMake practice or some exploration. Now the minimum version for our CMake that we're using right now is 2.8. So it's an older version, which is good. It makes it easier. And then this is just a description of everything in our project file. We'll come back to that. Each one of these is a module, and each one is compiled separately. So if we look at, say, color effects, you see this is also going to have a CMake list. And that's going to describe all the files in there, as well as how to build and where to put it. But the main component is going to be in a few places. The Toonz lib and Toonz Qt. Okay, so when we're looking at the shell, notice these folders. Nothing looks the same. It's all different. So it would actually be helpful if we could align these together so that what we see in the shell is what we actually see in QCreator. So coming back to QCreator, we can do that. Right now, notice it's listed as projects. I can actually change this. So if I were to choose File System, you see, now everything looks the same as it did in the shell. So it's just a matter of preference, what you choose to do. So if we leave it on projects, you know, modularize everything, and we can begin to look. So let's do some exploration. Inside of the header files for the Toonz lib, there's a number of things. So what I'd like to look for is I'd actually like to find the brushes. Like, where are the brushes actually created? And there's another way we can do in QCreator. If we press Control-K and just type in what we're looking for, here's brushes. Gives us a whole bunch of things. Now here's the MyPaint Toonz brush. Let's take a look at this one. So it looks like there's a class that makes a MyPaint surface, which inherits from MyPaint surface. So let's dig a little bit deeper. Let's actually look at this MyPaint. And if you roll your mouse over, the MyPaint header file, we should be able to actually see where it's from. Now this MyPaint header file, this is actually from libmypaint. And now we can take a look and say, how is this actually created? Right, so there's a dab method that takes an X and Y radius, 3 colors for RGB, the opacity, the hardness, the alpha for the eraser, an aspect ratio, an angle, the lock alpha, which is a way in which we can dissipate the brush over time, and then a colorize. And again, this is the header file, so there's no implementation. We could switch in a minute. And so now, if we want to say, all right, well, let's go back to this other call. So this pixel that's being read, so this is being painted on the surface. So now let's kind of take a look. So this tpixel32 is created. Let's dig into that a little bit. This is also something that's done in OpenToonz. So each one of these, this is all custom. Right? And some of the documentation is actually pretty good. But you can dig in and dig in. It's pretty in depth. But rather than travel down the path of despair, just try to focus on something very specific. So this right here, my OpenToonz brush. That's what I want. So this is kind of how I'd find things. So here's the my OpenToonz brush. So when a new brush is created in OpenToonz, this is how it's created. Now, if I would like to find it, I can now say, all right, well, who actually calls this? Who creates the my OpenToonz brush? Do a find, and it's going to show me all these different files. So a full color brush tool. This will bring us right to the tool for the full color brush. And this is what it expects. It also has an undo. Each one of these tools is wrapped in an undo as a side note. And then here's your undo. And this is everything that it requires. Like this is everything right here. So we can create something that's automated with our brushes as well. So just kind of looking through the code and trying to find your way around, navigate your way around. Because it's so large, it's important. I found it's a pretty interesting skill to have. How do I find things? How do I debug? And I'll probably spend a little bit of time on this, maybe do a couple of videos. What may seem really boring and futile is something that actually helps quite a bit. At least I found it to be so. So the default values that are being passed are the size, right? And these are the thickness. Then you'll have pressure and so forth. But if you come down and take a look at the thickness, this is where it's defined. I notice it's a pair property. So if we look at this too, the thickness part, this too is a class. You see? And then this is all of the information that is required for that thickness property. So inside of the full color tool, this is why it's expecting all of these things, these default values. And the same thing with pressure. So now let's go take a look at pressure. What's pressure? You see? The pressure property. That's another one. It inherits from T property. So there's a lot of weeds in here that you can dig through. But going through it is important. And each property is bound. So if we take a look at these mprop and the binding, let's take a look at the binding and what happens. So when these properties are bound, a new ID is created. If the ID is not valid, well, then it will throw an assertion. And the properties, so the properties themselves, can you guess what those are? Take a guess, give you a second. Meaning, what's the data type of this property? It's a vector of what? Pairs. So there are two pairs that are assigned. One is P, which is this property, T property. Do you remember what that was? But what's important here is the string ID. So we can create all of these properties and these brushes, and they'll have a string ID associated with them. That will make them unique. Therefore, when you look at the actual table, this property table, this is how everything's stored. It's all stored within a property table. And that property table is a map. And the map has the string ID and returns the property. Most of these things are done within the maps. It's just called the property table afterwards. And those properties are pointers. so it'll be fast. And you have a property vector, which is what we saw before. So although at first it does seem like it's pretty complex, and it is, there's a way in which we can kind of define it, simplify it, and understand what's happening underneath. So if we understand how everything's stored, it becomes easier to find things. Looking in this project file, so here's this file. Let's take a look now at some of the embedded QRC files. So if you right-click on the QRC file and choose Open in Editor, find this to be a little easier. These are all icons, and it'll even show you what the image looks like. So these are all the resources that are baked in, and this is where all the icons are. I'm going to give you the source path along with the actual icon itself. This is the full color brush tool, which was from my Paint tool brush, and this is where it's initiated. So if we do a search for my OpenToonz brush, it's going to give us a location of where everything is. So here it is in the full color. It's in the geometric tools. It's in the My Paint tool brush CPP, which we know, that's the implementation of it. And it's in the Toonz raster brush. So remember, in OpenToonz, there are different types of brushes. So we look at this, see, the My OpenToonz brush, which is a part of the My OpenToonz brush. See, My OpenToonz brush, which is part of the Toonz raster brush tool. So let's go ahead and run this. So now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to run OpenToonz. We're going to look at the interface and try to get an understanding of the code that we were just reviewing. Where is it actually happening? Alright, so here's the style editor. If we click on this tab right here, raster, this was what we were looking at in that code. Whenever you create a new brush, and whenever it's loading these brushes, this is what it's doing. So if I were to choose a brush, for instance, this one, and then I were to go to the settings and begin to change these settings, that's what was happening. These settings were actually being changed, and they were being stored. So remember, we saw some of these things. Remember the angular direction, the ascension, those came up, the offset, X and Y. That's what we were seeing in our code. The color values. Remember the opacity and the radius? All of those were showing up. So that's what we see. And the little icons that we saw, those represent each one of these brushes. So if we wanted to create a new brush, we could create it in the software, but we can also create custom brushes in code. And the next time, we'll take a look at that. We'll actually create a new brush with a new icon in code, and then try to apply it. So stay tuned. Hope this was helpful, and I'll see you next time.